Well, earlier today, he made it official. George Pataki is running for president. The former New York governor joining a crowded Republican field. He's such a long shot. Many are comparing him to this guy.
I mean, that's the story of my life. No respect. I don't get no respect at all. You kid, nothing, no respect at all.
Then Bill de Blasio showing no love for the Gov. After his visit to Albany, the mayor had some harsh words for Andrew Cuomo, and the governor, he's lashing back. We're going to tell you what they're all fighting over. Also, is the Democratic Party more liberal than it once was, and does it lean further left than the Republicans lean right? We will debate it, and some of the answers may surprise you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thanks so much for joining us tonight here. And we begin with that crowded Republican field that just got a little bit more crowded.
It is to preserve and protect that freedom for future generations that I speak. It is to preserve and protect that freedom that this morning I announce I am a candidate for the Republican nomination for President of the United States.
Well, he's in. George Pataki, former New York governor, is considered moderate, certainly compared to the field he's running against. And just last night, Rick Santorum jumped in. He's right of Pataki and just about right of just about everybody else in the field. He is also actually polling better, but that's not saying much because just about everyone else is. Take a look at this brand new Quinnipiac poll that came out. 5 guys tied for first, although I should mention nobody with more than 10%. Pataki isn't even in the top 10. He's at hash marks. Now, Mr. Pataki first announced his campaign, I should say, by releasing this video this morning. He was governor, as many of you remember, during 9/11, and in the video, he made sure to mention that.
When we stand together, we can accomplish anything. I saw that on the streets of New York in the days and weeks after September 11th. We understood we were all Americans who had been attacked and were going to rise up together, and we did.
Now, while that man certainly did a 180 with his political futures, that being Rudy Giuliani, nobody would confuse George Pataki with being the defining leader of New York in that same time on that terrible day, let alone in the aftermath. Let me bring in our panel right now. Richard Brodsky is a former New York Democratic Assemblyman. He's also senior fellow at Demos, professor at NYU. Republican strategist Bill O'Reilly also joins us, and Andrew Whitman, senior political correspondent, rounds out the table. Okay, Bill, it had long been rumored he'd get in, but the persistent question was why? He's a smart guy. To be a 3-term Republican governor in New York with the registration the way it is, there's an accomplishment in and of itself. But unless somebody's under his own household telling him, I don't know what else is telling him he's got a viable chance to win. But maybe that's not what this is about.
Right. I gotta say Richard did. Really? I gotta say Richard did. I gotta give him credit. I mean, I think the question is why not? I mean, what you've got right now is less of a horse race than a rodeo. I mean, you've got it's a field of 16 at this point, 16 viable, 31 candidates now. You know, many of them unheard of. 31 have declared interest in running for the Republican primary. It's just amazing. But as you said, George Pataki, 3-term Republican governor of New York. That alone demands respect. That alone says that you need to look at him seriously. That's an amazing feat. He's done a lot of things, and he did a lot of things following 9/11. He didn't get a lot of the coverage for it, but he did a lot of things behind the scene.
Okay, but let me come back for a second to the why not. There's the Don Quixote element to this, which is everybody wants to be president, but what does he have to do? He's now got to basically live in New Hampshire. He's got to work the phones nonstop, begging for money. I'm telling a guy who obviously does this for a living in terms of knowing what these things are about. Why not is he's at hash marks. He's below Donald Trump. There is a certain thing of pride and legacy.
He wants to do it. He wants to run for president. I mean, he wants to run for president. He's got a vision. He wants to go for it.
It's a great mistake to underestimate George Pataki politically, as you are doing. This is a guy who, when he announced he was running for governor, that was the same reaction. Now, I'm not predicting victory here, but he has a message. He stands out from the Republican field. He's not a wingnut. He's not a right-wing crazy person.
Well, can't you say the same thing about Jeb Bush? I mean, I can pick other guys.
Keep going.
Well, okay.
You see, you make my point. He has a place in the spectrum and New Hampshire is a friendly place for that kind of guy. So again, without predicting victory, this is not frivolous. This isn't silly. It's a long shot, but it's not frivolous and silly. Interestingly enough, if I, from the other side of the aisle, were to talk about George's strengths and weaknesses, I wouldn't pick 9/11 as his strength. It took 15 years to get that tower built, and it never should have happened that way. On the other hand, he has an innate decency. He has an innate ability to relate to people, and he's smart. And you know what? The Republican Party could use a little smart. It's not a lot of.
9/11 is the only buzzword, among that Pataki has that plays outside of New York that somebody in New Hampshire, somebody in Iowa is going to know or going to connect with him. So it doesn't. I don't begrudge him for using 9/11 as a selling point the same way that Rudy Giuliani did. I saw a piece that Chris Cillizza wrote in the Washington Post today that basically echoed the sentiment of why not for Pataki. He's not particularly relevant. He hasn't been in office since 2006. He's 70 years old, so this is probably his last go-round anyway. So why not run now? He's got nothing to lose. And when you look at the history of Republican candidates in recent cycles, a lot of them have made names for themselves and sort of come up with second lives after failed presidential runs.
Okay, but I want to come back. Maybe it's not just George Pataki, but it could be a whole host of folks, not just on that screen, but the guys that won't even make the cut to be on the stage of the debate, okay? Right. Some of those, whatever. He's accomplished something. 3-term governor, okay? And he left with his head held high, and for all the things we'll talk about Albany, nobody ever put a hand on him in terms of a label of corruption or anything else. To that point, this is my question. At the end, only one person wins. And maybe you're one of the last 2 or 3 standing, and certainly there's something to be said for that. But to go through all the source and aggravation that goes along with this, just to hope to be recognized, for some of the other ones, they got nothing to lose. But there is a why not for him, which is you marginalize who you are on the way out. And the idea to lose to a Donald Trump in a polling thing and to not even register with a single percentage point. But to me, isn't there a pride aspect that you do risk that?
He's got something that burns in him, and Governor Pataki didn't go away after being governor. He stayed involved in New York. He stayed involved in little races. I worked on tiny little races where he showed up to give endorsements, to give speeches. He stayed active. Like, he really cares about this stuff. He's really in. Donald Trump's not a candidate, and Donald Trump is a carnival.
I'm only using him as an extreme example.
ID.
You know?
But this is journalism run amok. The polls,
of which, by the way, you're in the world. Go ahead.
You're killing me.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is that polls at this point tell you nothing.
Okay, let's step this out, Richard. He can't win New York, okay? He's not going to win New York with Hillary running as a Democrat, even if somehow, some way he got through. Give me his compelling argument for somebody who's been out of the landscape
If we listened to you, everybody would go home, and we'd sit around, and in January of 2017, Hillary would take over, and we'd save ourselves $2 billion.
I can give credible arguments. I can give credible arguments for, forget whether I vote for him or not, but not only Jeb Bush, Walker. I can make an argument for Marco Rubio. I can go down the line
but they're
here.
conventional. George is credible but unconventional. I'm not predicting victory here. But for a 3-term governor who has something to say, which a lot of these other guys don't, to say, I want to go out and say it and let's see what happens. That's the American system, no matter what you journalists think is correct.
He's unconventional is that he's not going to overwhelm primary voters with personality or with dynamism at the
New
podium.
Hampshire is
the other thing is that he is, unfortunately for Pataki, so far out of step with where Republican primary voters seem to be, particularly in early voting states, including New Hampshire, Iowa, and South Carolina, that makes the fit even that much more difficult. Even if he is the only adult who's left on the podium at one of these debates, if he makes it to that debate.
Crazy.
No, but there are Republican primary voters? Republican primary voters?
When your voters split 16 ways, legitimately split 15 or 16 ways with those candidates, why not?
All right. Now, Bill de Blasio, he's back in the city after spending the whole day yesterday in Albany meeting with Governor Cuomo, among others. It seems like things did not go so well, and the sharp elbows came out by both of these guys here. The mayor and the governor had major disagreements about things like affordable housing, education, and they're certainly not afraid to talk about them. So, first off, what's your understanding about what happened yesterday? Did it follow the script here, or did it go a little bit more because these are two guys who don't like to share the stage?
Sharp elbows is a polite phrase for sledgehammers and brass knuckles. Look, put aside whether they like each other. I think what the mayor has learned is that the political currency that Andrew Cuomo respects is strength and toughness. And nice, please, would you think about, doesn't work, good or bad. So what he did is he came out in the currency that works and said, we're going to have to tussle here if we want to do things the way I want them done. I think that's a good thing. Whoever's right or wrong on the merits, another question. But if he's going to play in Albany, he's got to play the way he started to play instead of the way he played year one.
I gotta say, Bill de Blasio saved Governor Cuomo's hiney in the governor's race. That Working Families Party, he saved him in that. He would have had Zephyr Teachout in the primary, and he could have lost as a result. She would have taken a lot of vote. Bill de Blasio saved him that seat.
Okay, but what are
Did it
you
do him
hearing
any
in
good?
terms of?
No,
What?
that's the
That's the lesson he's
amazing.
learned.
Okay,
thing.
but
That's
what
the
is
lesson he's
your?
learned.
What are you hearing behind the scenes as to how the two? There's one thing with public posturing and the rest, but Andrew's got a reputation as not playing well with others, and de Blasio's got a reputation as somebody who certainly sees himself with a very elevated stature. Is that what's going on behind the scenes too?
And I don't mean to be. I'm not looking to be so critical of the governor, but he tends to see anything other than strength as a weakness to be killed. If there's a kindness or generosity is shown towards him, he tends to see that as a fault in somebody, and he attacks. It's a bizarre phenomenon.
The strength. This is now a test of strength rather than a test of personality. De Blasio was correct to make it that. Whether he has the horses to get anything done is to be seen. But he's got to behave the way he's
And
behaving.
keep in mind the dynamics of that relationship are changing because, whatever you think of whether de Blasio is weaker than he was a year ago because of trying to play
Certainly the
more
polls
of a
say so,
national,
yeah.
but trying to play on a national front or being that progressive, centerpiece that everybody claims he is. Look at how far Andrew Cuomo has fallen in the polls and in his job approval. And considering the problems that Albany has had, you would seem that he might very well have less concentrated power than he did a year ago the last time they butted heads on these issues. De Blasio is certainly right to test that and to see how much sway he holds. With
You know the
downstate legislators.
dynamic. I was just thinking full circle here. We showed at the beginning of the clip of Rudy and then Pataki at the time. Could you imagine, God forbid, that there was another incident that was so devastating to the city, that Cuomo would ever bequeath basically the mantle to the mayor of New York City and basically not disappear into the shadows, but remember what Cuomo at the time said, that he carried Rudy's coat, okay? That was one of the comments that got him in some hot water at the time in his losing gubernatorial bid. The point is how different those personalities are right now. Andrew Cuomo, I don't care what he'd have to do, he would be the guy who would be in front of it. De Blasio may not go quietly, but there would be that.
Yeah.
And maybe it's because it's grace but Pataki stepped back and let Rudy basically be the face in the aftermath of that tragedy.
I
Just
think
see
that's
how
what
different those
grace,
personalities
enormous
are.
grace is a terrific word, and enormous decency of the governor.
Look, I like George, but give me a break. They made a deal. George would get control of downtown, and Rudy got
It's all
control of the
afterwards.
West Side development.
All afterwards, though.
There was
Yeah.
a
But
political
I'm talking about
accommodation.
the day of and the day after.
Look, the day I met with a group with Mayor Giuliani 3 days after the event down there, he was gracious, listening. He was not exactly treated well by some of my colleagues. He didn't respond in kind. He was fine.
Yeah.
We're not going to revisit today based on what happened in 2000.
I'm sorry, Richard, where our company is, we are revisiting it because the governor chose to launch his campaign with the imagery of he was the guy in post 9/11 America who helped rebuild New York here, and he was the face of post 9/11 New York. That's how he chose to launch his campaign. So he's attaching himself
Wait a minute.
to that chapter
Whether
in
he's
New York.
using it for political purposes or not,
I'm not
is
even
a-
faulting him. I'm saying that's what he's doing.
Is a perfectly legitimate thing for him to do. The better question here, as it reflects on the question about de Blasio and Cuomo, is whether this is a personality conflict or a deeper political a fight. And
Or is it both?
It's always both.
Well, let's get
But the
into
fact
that.
that-
Wait.
and they
Well,
both think
let's
so.
jump to a break because on the other side of the break here, we only got 20 days left, and there's countless real issues, not posturing, but real issues that have still to be addressed. The legislative session in Albany is winding down. Problems keep propping up. We're going to go through the big things that are hanging out there for lawmakers to address and the consequences if they don't.